All right. Welcome and good evening. Um, I never did get to upload the Passover part two portion from last week, and it was like the most amazing, like revelatory to me anyway. And it just like YouTube kept messing it up, and then I got on when I was really tired and like watched the video back and ended up deleting it because I felt like I didn't make any sense. So here we are, and it is um, already the week has passed, and we're halfway into the following week, and I still haven't done it. But I thought I'd give a little recap. So I ended my part one video from week 15 right before the Lord comes and tells Moses and Aaron to have the Israelites um, sacrifice the Passover lamb. And so here, I'm going to just read a little bit of that. So we'll backtrack and then we'll get caught up. So, chapter 12 of Exodus, verse 1 Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month will mark the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year for you. Now, I don't know about you, but if you pay attention to um, the events that led up to this, him saying this, they had the plague of hail, which it destroyed the barley harvest, and then they had the plague of locusts, which destroyed the wheat and spelt. Excuse me. I am not by any means sick, but I have got like drainage and allergies, so I apologize if I get all like snotty and gooky. Anyway, those two harvests happen during springtime. So, um, and we celebrate Passover in the month of Nisan. Usually, the 10th day of the month is when you're supposed to pick the lamb, and then the 14th you sacrifice it, slaughter it, put the blood on the doorpost, all of that. That was what God commanded. He goes ahead and says that. He says, don't boil it. It has to be roasted on by fire, and you have to keep it whole. You cannot break a bone in its body. Okay, this was all a type and a shadow, foreshadowing the coming of Yeshua, the Messiah. And he was the ultimate Passover lamb. He was sacrificed during Passover week. Um, so he gives this instruction, and he says, "This is the first month of the year for you." It wasn't in January, guys. And I believe this is important because the next part of everything says to get the leaven out, which is Passover is the first night, and that's when they put the blood on the upper and the sides of the doorposts, and the Lord passed over them when he um, took the firstborn of the Egyptians, right? So the reason I'm saying it's important, he said during this whole week, starting on the night of Passover, you're to take all the leaven out of your house, all the leavening agents, all the yeast, all the sourdough starter, all the stuff. Get it out. And anyone who eats leaven will be cut off. And here's what that represented. If you don't already know, which many of us do, I'm still learning so much. So I tend to skip over things that I think other people might know. And I feel like maybe you don't. So the leavening agents were they were an example of, remember in the New Testament when Jesus says to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, it was these traditions that they um, that seeped into them practicing their faith, and they were telling people they had to pay a temple tax and they had to, do all of these things that were not a part of God's instructions. And so and it made them feel puffed up and righteous, and they weren't. It wasn't a part of anything God asked anybody to do. And so the leaven in the Old Testament, same thing. It was part of the belief system, the doctrines that had been slowly worked in and assimilated into their culture and into the way they worshiped Yahweh. And it was a problem because he was trying to bring them out. And that's what he's doing today with us. I think he's always been doing that. But more than anything now, I believe that this is like a prophetic message for us today. So, starting with the way that we celebrate even our year and our calendar. Um, the new year doesn't begin in January. It begins in springtime when he makes everything new. Everything's been dead and dormant and in winter, and it appears to have lost all of its life. And then the first sign of spring is those little sprouts coming up from the ground and the grass turns green again. Why would that not be the first month of the year for us? Like, I never thought of this until this year, guys. Like, Nisan, which would be the month that I believe he's referring to, because that's usually when we celebrate Passover in the Hebrew calendar, that literally means to make new. Um, so, and then the season of spring is called Aviv, which again is to revive and to new life, new breath. Okay, so think about that and consider that as we come into the true new year in March, the end of March, beginning of April. This was even a big deal under Roman rule because the Gregorian calendar started to go into effect, and they said, no, New Year's in January. And they're like, the Hebrews were like, no, God said, through Moses, he said that it was when we celebrate Passover, it's springtime. And so they kept celebrating it on or around April 1st. And the Romans, just like how anyone who questioned the mainstream narrative got called a conspiracy theorist back in the 60s, that was a term coined by the CIA. um, the Romans called everybody April Fools who still celebrated God's calendar. Hey, that's my anniversary. Makes me really proud. I didn't know what it was at the time, but now I'm really happy that that's my day. All right, so as he tells them what to do, he tells them to pick a lamb for your house, one lamb for every household on the 10th day of this month that he's commanding them. And on the 14th day, you put all the blood, or you drain all the blood, and you're to eat the lamb, roast it over the fire. Why? He said, don't boil it, don't eat any of it raw. Why? Because to roast a lamb on the spit, so to speak, it has to be lifted up. And this was, again, everything is purposeful. It's pointing to Yeshua. So the second thing he tells them is that they have to eat it with their loins girded, meaning get your belt strapped on. Don't be undressed. Be ready to go. And this really struck me. And I felt like it was important for us because Passover is coming, end of March, beginning of April, that week. And it says you are to eat it with your shoes on your feet. Sorry. Oh, tired, Mom. Okay. Shoes on your feet and your staff in your hand. This means you're ready to travel. You're ready to do what God is going to command you to do, whatever that might be. They had no idea. They just knew step by step what he had told them. So there was no plan in place. And I feel like this is so important because I'm not a planner by any stretch of the imagination, but I am a worrier sometimes. And this whole entire chapter gave me a lot of peace. So it says, it is Adonai's Passover. And this is how he commanded them to eat it. Like, loins girded, shoes on your feet, staff in your hand. If you knew the Hebrew culture, when they had feasts, this was not their typical get up. Okay, it was usually very relaxed. It usually was like a second Sabbath, no matter what day it fell on. So this is very interesting that he says this. And then the next verse, he says, "For tonight I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down on that night, every firstborn, both men and animals." And here's the most important part to me: "I will execute judgments against all of the gods of Egypt." And if you study scripture, you know that those gods are not made up. They are fallen deities, fallen angels that became worshipped throughout these cultures. And the sons of the fallen angels were also worshipped as deities, Nimrod being one of those. Osiris was his name in the Egyptian culture. Okay, we have all of this idol worship and worship of fallen angels and false gods. So he wasn't judging and exacting judgment on the people, although they were reaping the consequences of worshiping these gods, but he was judging the gods. And if you look back in Genesis, that's exactly what he did. I believe that the flood took place on Passover week. That's me. A lot of other people and scholars agree. Pardon me. And I know that as well, when Abraham was warned about Sodom and Gomorrah being judged and destroyed for the same reasons, the 4 angels that came to warn him when they approached his tent, what did he run out and give them when they got close? He gave them unleavened bread. And if you keep reading, he says to them that you are supposed to eat it in the end of chapter 12 all week long, starting on the first night of Passover until the following week. You're to eat unleavened bread and take all of the leavening agents out of your house. And so this was not a normal practice for them. They usually ate like full-on bread, like hearty loaves of bread. This was not something that they usually did. So the fact that Abraham had unleavened bread in his hand, ready and prepared, and already baked when he ran out to them, tells me that because it says in Genesis that he followed the Lord's mitzvahs, which were his laws, his statutes, his commands. And so I believe that his appointed times were part of that. They weren't written down yet, okay? And he had to remind the Israelites of this when they were leaving, because they weren't still practicing God's commands. They weren't still doing what he had started out with Abraham, because they had lived in Egypt for 430 years, okay? So, anyhow, all that to say, there's a reason he tells them to be ready. And every Passover before that, there was a preparation for the righteous to run and to flee in some way, whether it be through an ark or through getting out of the city, whatever it was, they had to obey God and they had to do it quickly, okay? It's pretty cool if you look through history. All right, so he's going to execute judgment against the gods of Egypt. And the blood over the doorposts will be a sign for you in the houses where you are. When I see the blood, I'll pass over you, so there will be no plague among you when I destroy and strike the land of Egypt. All right, so you are to keep this Passover as a memorial. It will be a memorial for you, and you are to keep it as a feast to Adonai throughout all generations. You are to keep it as an eternal ordinance. Interesting. For 7 days you are to eat matzot, which is the unleavened bread. But on the first day you must remove all of the leaven from your houses. For whoever eats the leaven, or hametz is what it's called, from the first day until the 7th day, that soul will be cut off from Israel. Okay? He's dead serious, about us removing the things, the mixture of truth with the lies. And the lies seem so similar to the truth that sometimes they're hard to recognize. And so he's saying, just get it all out, because if you don't remove it, you're going to be tempted to use it. So like flee from this stuff, okay? It was it was a symbol. And we have to understand that, because if we just go around getting rid of all of our yeast in our house, but we don't understand why he asked them to do this, then we're missing everything. Okay? If we're going to honor the feasts of the Lord, like, let's do it with intention. Okay. The first day is to be a holy assembly for you, as well as the seventh day. No manner of work is to be done on those days except what is to be eaten by every person. That alone may be prepared by you. So you're to, hold on. You're to observe the feast of unleavened bread. For on this very same day I have brought your ranks out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you are to observe this day throughout your generations as an eternal ordinance. So that's feast number 2. Passover kicks it off, and unleavened bread goes through the week for 7 days. Eternal ordinance. That means forever. During the first month, in the evening of the 14th day of the month, you're to eat matzot, unleavened bread, until the evening of the 21st day of the month. So he's very specific. He doesn't mix words. He tells us exactly when. So on that sliver of the new moon of the first month, which is Nisan, then we are to count 10 days, pick a lamb, kill it, do whatever. I mean, okay, let's not get legalistic about this, because a lot of us don't have lambs in our backyard. The point is to remember what he has done. Remember when he celebrated Passover with his disciples? What did he say? Do this in remembrance of me. Me. I am the lamb. Okay? So let's not get caught up. It's so easy to do. To get caught up with these, what do I do? What do I not do? Don't miss the point. Okay? During the first month and the evening of the 14th day. Okay, so he says to do all that. Go select lambs for your families to slaughter. None of you may go out of the door of this house where your lamb is prepared and killed until the morning. You are to eat, he says, eat all of the lamb in one night. You kill it at twilight, drain its blood, put it on the doorpost, eat it. Do not keep any leftovers, because the Lord knew he was going to bring them out. And he was telling them this. Okay, 430 years. 210 of those years were slavery. Do you maybe think that they were like, yeah, we're going to go? I'm just saying, all right? But they still obeyed. He continues to say, you are also to observe this event as an eternal ordinance. Eternal means forever. For you and your children. And he says, even when you go into the land that I promise you, keep this ceremony. It's the sacrifice of Adonai's Passover, because he passed over the houses of the sons of Israel in Egypt when he struck down the Egyptians but spared our households. This is what he says to tell your children. Okay? And so the people bowed their heads and they worshipped. Yeah, no kidding. Now the part that was really hard for me to read, starting in verse 30 of chapter 12, there was not a house where someone was not dead. Okay, the angel of the Lord takes the firstborn of every house, including from all the way from Pharaoh's house to the dungeon where prisoners are held, and all the animals. And so all of the Egyptians urged the Israelites to get out. And they said, if you don't leave, we'll all be dead. So the people took their dough with their kneading bowls bound up in their clothes on their shoulders. And the sons of Israel acted according to the words of Moses.